When you stop trying, really stop, the silence that follows doesn't go unnoticed. It doesn't just disappear into the air like you were never there. It echoes. It lingers in the corners of her mind because it wasn't expected. She was used to the attention, the calls, the messages, the effort. You showing up always, no matter how you were treated. And then suddenly, nothing. That's when the shift happens. That's when the discomfort begins. Because the truth is, your silence, when it's rooted in self-respect and not resentment, speaks a language she understands far more deeply than words ever could. People often underestimate the weight of withdrawal. They think walking away is passive, but it's not. It's an active decision to reclaim your dignity. When you've given someone multiple chances to meet you halfway, to respect your presence, to engage with mutual care, and they continue to take that for granted, then silence becomes your final boundary. And that boundary isn't just protective for you, it's revelatory for them. Because now they're left with the absence of the very energy they once assumed would always be there. And that absence is louder than any confrontation. The truth is, it doesn't haunt her because you're trying to be cruel. It haunts her because for the first time she has to wonder. Wonder why you stopped texting. Wonder why you no longer reach out. Wonder why the man who once showed up with consistency and sincerity suddenly disappeared without a dramatic goodbye. And that wondering forces her into a space she doesn't know how to navigate because it requires self-reflection. It demands that she examine her behavior. It pushes her to look inward instead of pointing the finger outward. See, the ego can handle rejection when it's loud and emotional. When there's yelling or pleading or blaming, she can frame the narrative to protect herself. But when you say nothing, when your silence is total and clean, there's no narrative to cling to. There's just her and her choices. And that silence becomes a mirror. Not a mirror of you, but of her. Of the way she treated you. Of the things she said. Of the opportunities she let slip through her fingers. While assuming you'd always be there, you didn't slam the door. You simply stopped holding it open. And that's the part that haunts her most. Because deep down she knows that if someone like you could walk away without bitterness, it means she lost something real. Not something dramatic or toxic, but something steady, loyal, and grounded. And that kind of loss doesn't leave with noise. It leaves with stillness. A stillness that echoes longer than any goodbye. Let her sit with that silence. It says everything. One of the most powerful forces in human psychology is uncertainty. It gnaws at the edges of the mind, especially when it's paired with a sudden silence. When you stop reaching out, when you pull back completely without explanation or drama, you create a space where she has no clear answers, only questions. And that space, that lack of clarity, becomes fertile ground for overthinking, second-guessing, and reflection. Not because you were cruel, but because the mind hates an unfinished story. And you've become an unfinished story. When you remove yourself without providing closure, she's forced to fill in the blanks. That's the mechanism of projection. Her own conscience, her memories, her patterns, they start replaying everything. Every word you said, every moment you showed up, every instance she dismissed your effort. And because you're no longer there to justify yourself or soften the blow, her thoughts start writing the narrative for her. Only this time, they aren't filtered through her ego. They're filtered through absence, and absence is sharp. It cuts deeper than confrontation because it offers no defense, no reassurance. The mind will try to make sense of it. She'll wonder if you stopped caring or if you're with someone else. She'll imagine you tired of the games, or maybe that you finally saw through the behavior she thought she was hiding so well. She'll think back to every moment where she could have done more but didn't, every message she could have sent but withheld, every time she thought you'd keep trying forever, and realize, maybe for the first time, that forever had a limit. And here's the most striking part. None of it had to be said. You didn't need to deliver a lecture or a final declaration of your worth. You just stopped feeding the pattern. And in doing so, you triggered the very thing she tried to avoid: emotional accountability. See, if you had stayed and argued or pleaded, she would have remained in control of the emotional narrative. But now she's not the one being pursued. She's the one left wondering why the energy disappeared. That wondering is powerful because it shifts her from being the object of your focus to becoming the subject of her own introspection. And the irony is that your silence will say more than all the messages you ever sent. Every unanswered text, every unreturned call, every decision to choose peace over chaos, those become lessons. And they echo, not because you intended to cause pain, but because you finally stopped trying to ease hers at the cost of your own. That's when it hits her. Not all loss is loud, and not every ghost leaves with a scream. Some simply stop showing up. And that's what makes them unforgettable. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing you can no longer access someone you once took for granted. That shift, when a person who used to be available, emotionally invested, present, suddenly isn't there anymore, that shift hits harder than people expect. And it doesn't matter how strong someone appears on the outside, because when that change happens, when the attention they were used to suddenly vanishes, it disrupts their internal sense of control. Not because you did something vindictive, but because the consistency they once relied on to feed their ego or reinforce their sense of importance is gone. Human beings often miscalculate the value of presence until it's gone. You were the constant, the reliable one, the one who tried, reached out, and made room. And for a while, that consistency became part of her world, even if she never admitted it. It was comforting to know you'd message first. It was satisfying to feel desired, to know that no matter what happened, you'd eventually come back around. That emotional predictability was power. But when you step away, when you don't announce it or beg to be noticed, it triggers something far more intense than words, a loss of control. Because it's not just about you not calling anymore, it's about what that silence says. It says you're no longer willing to play a role in her emotional ecosystem. It says you've withdrawn your energy without needing her permission. And that kind of autonomy, especially when it comes from someone who used to be fully available, is disarming. It breaks the rhythm she was comfortable with. It leaves a space open, and she doesn't know how to fill it. The ego doesn't like confusion. It wants to believe it's always the one in charge. And when she realizes she no longer has control over your behavior, that she can't just reel you back in with a breadcrumb of attention, the illusion crumbles. You're no longer orbiting her world. You're not chasing validation. You're just gone. And that quiet absence creates a tension she can't resolve externally. She has to sit with it, to feel it, to ask herself the questions she avoided asking when she believed you'd always be there. And that discomfort, sitting with the unknown, confronting the emptiness where you used to be, it leaves a far greater impact than any speech you could have given. Because now she's forced to consider not just your absence, but what it means, what it reflects about her, what it cost her, and how, without ever saying a word, you taught her the most unforgettable lesson: presence is not a guarantee. So let her wonder, let her feel what it's like to lose access to something real, not because you wanted to hurt her, but because you finally remembered your own worth. There's an emotional recoil that happens when someone realizes you've stopped trying. And it doesn't unfold all at once. It builds slowly. It creeps in during quiet moments. Moments she didn't expect to be affected. Maybe she's scrolling through old messages and notices there hasn't been a new one from you. Maybe she checks a photo and for a split second wonders if you've forgotten. Or maybe it's when someone else brings up your name and she's hit with that strange emptiness, the kind that makes her realize you're no longer part of her story the way you used to be. That's when the subtle haunting begins. It's not loud, it doesn't scream. It whispers in the gaps, in the silence, in the choices you no longer make on her behalf. And it's especially powerful because it challenges her sense of emotional invincibility. She believed, maybe unconsciously, that you'd always try. That no matter how cold or distant she became, no matter how many tests she set in motion, you'd remain constant. But now that you've stepped back, the balance has shifted. You're no longer the predictable one. You've disrupted the narrative she told herself about your place in her life. And the hardest part for her to accept isn't your absence. It's the realization that your absence came without warning, without a fight, without final words. It's that quiet departure that echoes the loudest. Because it means you didn't need closure. You didn't need to explain yourself. You simply reached a point where trying became too expensive emotionally. And you paid that cost in silence. This unnerves her because people are often more comfortable with conflict than they are with distance. Conflict gives them something to push against, something to control or manipulate. But distance, true, unbothered, peaceful distance, is a different kind of weight. It carries the implication that the other person is no longer emotionally invested. And for someone who once thrived on the idea of your pursuit, that's a deeply unsettling realization. She's left wondering not just about you, but about herself. Was she worth the effort? Did she push too far? Did she mistake your persistence for weakness when it was actually a reflection of your strength? And now that strength has turned inward. It's no longer used to chase, but to walk away. That shift in energy, that quiet reclaiming of self-respect, that's what lingers in her mind. It's not about punishing her or proving a point. It's about removing yourself with dignity. And in doing so, you force her to look in the mirror and face a question that will stay with her long after you've gone. What does it say about her that you stopped trying? Let her sit with that silence, because nothing haunts quite like the realization that someone who truly cared no longer does. What most people don't understand is that withdrawal, when it comes from a place of clarity and not resentment, is incredibly powerful. It doesn't scream, it doesn't accuse, and it doesn't demand attention. It just moves on. And that calm departure can echo louder than any argument ever could. Because when you stop trying, when you stop chasing, you're not punishing her. You're simply revealing that you've grown beyond the need to explain your worth to someone who treated it as optional. This kind of silence creates space. Space for reflection, space for questions that never needed asking before. You were always the one reaching out, solving problems, being emotionally available, absorbing her moods, accommodating her inconsistencies, and maybe she never consciously realized how much of yourself you gave away just to keep the connection alive. But now that you've stopped, now that you're no longer making her feel like the center of your emotional universe, there's a void. And that void says more than any well-worded message ever could. She starts wondering, not just where you went, but why. And it's in that wondering that a subtle transformation begins. The absence of your effort forces her to acknowledge something she may have never wanted to admit. You were doing the emotional heavy lifting. You were showing up when she didn't. You were giving when she withheld. And now that balance is gone. But here's what really haunts her. It's the realization that you didn't leave out of bitterness. You didn't explode or lash out. You didn't guilt her into feeling bad. You just faded, disappeared from the emotional framework she had taken for granted. That quiet exit exposes her to a truth she can't manipulate or talk her way around. It's final, it's composed, it's self-respecting, and that's what makes it unforgettable. Because most people expect drama when someone walks away. They expect a storm. But when you remove yourself with poise, when you leave no mess behind, it's far more jarring. She doesn't get to play the victim. She doesn't get to control the narrative. She's just left staring at the blank space where your effort used to be. And it eats at her, not because of what you did, but because of what she didn't do when she had the chance. She'll remember your silence long after she forgets the sound of your voice. There's a strange psychological effect that happens when someone who was once so present suddenly stops showing up. At first, it doesn't hit her all at once. She may even feel relieved. There's quiet, there's no pressure, no expectations. But time has a way of turning silence into a mirror. And the longer she goes without hearing from you, the more that silence starts reflecting everything she chose to ignore, not just about you, but about herself. Because you weren't just trying, you were consistent. And that consistency became predictable, which made it easy for her to dismiss. She assumed you'd always be there, always circling back, always forgiving. That's the problem with human nature. We tend to grow numb to what's always within reach. And we often don't appreciate presence until it becomes absence. But when you disappear, not out of anger, but out of strength, that absence has weight. It lingers. It stirs something inside her. At first, she might try to rationalize it. He's just playing a game. He's trying to get a reaction. But over time, when no message comes through, no calls, no accidental likes, no signs that you're watching from a distance, it dawns on her, you're not playing a game. You've accepted reality. You've moved on. And that's the very thing she can't explain away. Now she's stuck in her own feedback loop, quietly haunted by your absence. It isn't that she wants you back. It's that she can't understand why you let go so easily. And that thought alone becomes a source of discomfort. Because deep down, part of her expected you to hold on forever. She thought her inconsistency would always be met with your devotion. But now, all she's left with is the memory of your effort and the gnawing question of whether she ever deserved it. You see, when someone walks away in peace, it leaves no room for closure. There's nothing to fight against. There's no last word, no final plea, and that lack of resolution becomes its own kind of torment. She doesn't get to win. She doesn't get to rewrite the story. She's just left wondering what changed and why you never looked back. Let her sit with that question, because sometimes the most haunting thing you can leave behind is nothing at all.